Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. It's been an extraordinary year for Crown Resorts. It started with the company being deemed unsuitable to operate a casino in Sydney. Since then, there's been the damning findings of the Victorian Royal Commission, while another one is still underway in Western Australia. There was a proposed and abandoned merger with Rival Star and 3 takeover bids from private equity giant Blackstone. But another reason Crown is never far from the headlines is the involvement of billionaire James Packer. He's committed to selling down his 37% stake in Crown to under 5% following the Victorian Royal Commission. So what happens next for the company does hinge largely on the 54-year-old. He's certainly a fascinating individual, and today I wanted to take a closer look at what drives him. Damon Kitney is a business journalist and the author of The Price of Fortune, the biography of James Packer, a person who knows James Packer probably better than most. Damon, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
The myth of James Packer, what's he really like?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer in a short time, but I think one of the key things about Packer is he's a very misunderstood character, and I think if you look at the public discourse on him over his life, but particularly in recent years, he's probably come across as, a very ruthless businessman, potentially a bully at times, a person who, knows how to use power to get his own way. There's certainly those aspects to James Packer's character which he would openly acknowledge, and as he really did acknowledge in that book. But deeper down, there's a much more complex individual, sadly a very troubled individual, the product of a number of things, but most notably his upbringing in a very, very difficult situation with a very tough father who he loved deeply and will not speak any ill will of, despite his passing many years ago now. But I think the real problem for James through his life, if I was to sum it up in a sentence, is he's trusted the wrong people.
Right.
And that has brought him terrible things in so many different facets of his life, whether it's business, his personal life, his friendships. And I think he would acknowledge that that is probably one of his greatest flaws, is he falls head over heels for people and genuinely trusts them when they arguably are not deserving of that trust. And as a result, I think over many years he's been surrounded by a group of people who are not necessarily acting in his best interests. At the worst case, some of them have been sycophants, essentially.
Yep.
Others have sort of been trying to do the right thing, but have also had some vested interests of their own. Very few have genuinely, I think, sort of tried to help him and do the right thing by him. And he knows that, and it's been very difficult for him. And I think going forward, he's going to find it very hard to trust many people because he has been burnt so badly so many times.
It's really interesting when you read your book, there are a couple of people who are incredibly successful themselves. I'm thinking of Kerry Stokes and Alan Jones, the broadcaster, who are very impressive when you read your book and you hear what they have to say about James. They're very honest compared to perhaps some of the others.
True. About
what they view. And it is interesting, those two particularly have a real affection and genuine concern for him, it seems.
Yeah, well, I'll start with Jones. I mean, that was actually quite controversial, I guess, through the book process, because I don't know Alan Jones especially well. He was very generous with the time he gave me in the book, but he talked about things that have really been taboo in the Packer public discourse, most notably James's relationship with his late father's mistress, which is well known, and Jones actually made some very strong comments about the bond between them and how difficult he felt it was for James growing up in that sort of bubble as such. And that was very honest by Alan.
Yeah.
And I think it did cause a bit of grief when the book came out, but I think overall it was just an honest view. And I think Jones genuinely has an affection for James. He really, is saddened by what he sees. Again, James surrounded by, people not necessarily looking out for his best intentions, miles from his homeland. And as Jones says in the book, come home, James, there's people here that love you and want to help you, but that's the sad reality for James Packer. I think he would openly acknowledge that, Sydney holds a lot of demons for him, Sydney in particular, and I don't know whether you'll ever see him ever live in this country again.
Kerry Stokes?
Yeah, so with Stokes, and that's a very strange relationship because they were arch enemies for so many years. I mean, Stokes and Kerry Packer were great adversaries. I think, Kerry Stokes has genuinely seen who the real James Packer is, that he is does have a heart down
Yep.
beneath all the bluster, and I think he genuinely has wanted to help him. And I think through the whole Mariah Carey situation, Stokes, with his experience, I guess, of being a worldly person for many, many years, he saw the danger and he wanted to help James out of that situation. And who knows what would have happened if Kerry Stokes hadn't have intervened in those circumstances. James would probably be married to Mariah Carey, and who knows what from there.
Yeah. Stay with me, Damon. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Damon Kitney, business commentator and the author of The Price of Fortune, the biography of James Packer. James Packer clearly has a charming side. I mean, I've been on the end of James Packer tirades, but he's also kind of charming as well.
Yeah, I think that's totally right, Sean, and I think a lot of people don't understand that side to his character. Those that have seen him over the decades do appreciate it. I think certainly, it took charm to do the things that he did in business. A lot of people forget, the investments that he got into early, like companies like Seek and car sales that, we just talk about now as like the powerhouses of the internet. Well, James Packer picked them early on and invested in them. Sadly, he got out of them at the, well before they matured and left a lot of money on the table. And I think, that knocks him around. I think the sad reality now for James, and again, he would acknowledge this, is his difficult mental health issues, which have, led to him taking a lot of different prescription medicines, which he talks about in the book. I think they've probably taken an edge off that charm, sadly, because, it really does dull your mood, that sort of those drugs. And I think now he's on a very sort of somber, calm wavelength, if that's the right term. And you won't probably see ever again, that amazing James Packer, as you say, charm and great humour that he had. It's just not quite there as it used to be. But you see glimpses of it when you speak to him, and, he's doing his best in a really difficult situation. But again, he would acknowledge that it's just been a lot harder for him, to keep his emotions under control.
You went to different parts of the world, literally, to do the book, and he contributed to the book. What's his relationship like with his kids, for example, and his ex-wives and things like that? Did you ever see him with his kids?
Well, the ex-wives first, he still has a very good relationship with the mother of his children, Erica, and, they have a very cordial relationship. I would say they're still very good friends, especially for the sake of the children. His first wife, Jodie Mears, incredibly close to her. I mean, they're real kindred spirits, I think. And, Jodie was kind enough to give me a face-to-face interview for the book, and it was quite amazing to see just what sort of, regard she had for James. Whatever the critics might say about her motivations, you could just see it in the way that she spoke. And she regularly spends time with James now in the various parts of the world. They remain really good friends, and as I said, kindred spirits. With his children, I mean, that was a real privilege when I met him in Mexico for a few days for a series of interviews on the book. His children were actually there when I arrived, and he'd just actually come from a boat trip with them out in the Sea of Cortez. And yeah, I mean, he's like any father. He loves his kids, and, he looks really devoted to them when you see him with them. I mean, another little part of the book which was quite moving, I guess, is when I saw him in France in the last stage of the interview. His children were actually staying in Saint-Tropez, and he went off and spent 3 or 4 hours with them at a house Erica was renting there, and you could see, in his eyes when he came back how nice it was. And someone that went with him that day, when they returned, they said to me, you could just see, particularly in Jackson, James's son's eyes, he lit up when his dad came into the room. And at the end of the day, it's a surreal world with, boats and planes and houses and all this, but he still is a father to 3, pretty special children for him.
Yeah.
So he's a human being like all of us.
So tell me, why do you think he let you in, Damon? Because he's intensely private, and I know you have known him for a long time, and it's a true credit to you. But it still surprised me somewhat that he allowed a journalist in.
Yeah, I've been asked that question a lot of times. I think it was just about context. That's probably the most important point. I was very lucky with the timing of all this coming together. he was at a point in his life in 2017 at the end of that where there was a lot of mystery about what he'd been doing. He'd just finished the relationship with Mariah Carey at the end of 2016, and 2017 was a disastrous year for him, with various things happening at Crown and staff being arrested in China, which made global headlines. And he just went into the third nervous breakdown of his life and just retreated. And I guess when I came knocking and, a publisher did ask me, would James cooperate for his biography? And I actually told them there's no way that's going to happen. But I think, when I approached James with the idea, he clearly thought, well, now's a good opportunity to work with someone that I trust to tell my truth, as he calls it. And, we've always had a very courteous professional relationship, but, we're not sort of bosom buddies as such. We don't hang out together. It's always been, as I said, a very professional relationship, and that's the way it was right through the book. I mean, I was there to do a job, and he respected that, and he gave me amazing access and, amazing openness, I think, in that process. And for him, he will always say that book is, that's the best chance for my truth to be told to the world in a, fair and balanced way. And he's always had a very uneasy relationship with the media. He always feels that he gets treated unfairly. That's up for debate. But I think in that context, he felt that, this was an opportunity to get a fair and balanced hearing. And I guess that's what I always do in my journalism, and it didn't differ in the book.
So what about Crown Resorts? Do you think it would pain him to see what's happened in the last year or two?
Oh, yeah. I think he's absolutely beats himself up every day about what's happened at Crown. I think it's caused him a lot of emotional damage before we even talk about the monetary side.
Yeah.
Financially, Crown has dropped significantly in value in the last couple of years. It's now thankfully getting up to a bit better value than what it was. But, I just think Crown has been his life, I guess, for many years. And, that's why he's been, I guess, so involved, even, from thousands of miles away in the management of the company, as was highlighted in the Royal Commissions. But I think you have to be clear that, James wasn't sort of sitting there every day running the business from, a boat in the sea somewhere.
Yep.
He just wanted to keep tabs on the operations, and he thinks about it every day. He thinks about the numbers, how they're going. It pains him when they have a bad night with the high rollers, for example. He's just very connected to the business. And unfortunately, as the Royal Commission in Sydney found, and in Melbourne, that influence, was actually quite damaging for the business, particularly being a bit of an absentee landlord, as he was for many years.
Do you think, he has to sell down his 37% stake over, the Royal Commission wanted 3 years. I think he's pushing for 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you think that this latest offer from the private equity group Blackstone is good enough?
Oh, I don't think it's going to be good enough at that price, but I think it certainly has started the process. And I think the fact that the Crown board, although they rejected the initial bid last week, the fact they opened for some due diligence is a turning point.
Yep.
And I think we're now on a process which is going to see, the Packer family exit Crown. It's just a question of when and what the price is. And I think, James would have been very relieved as well as happy to see Blackstone return, because I think in his eyes, there was a period last year where he seriously would have thought that they would have lost their licenses everywhere.
Yep.
And I think it's been an amazing relief to him that A, they didn't, and B, there are still big global companies with deep pockets like Blackstone who are willing to, buy the assets. So I think for him, that's just a real blessing.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, he will sell. That's a fact. And it's just a question of what the price will be and over what time frame that's going to happen. But he'll certainly be out of there, well before that 3-year deadline, I would imagine, if he can orchestrate it.
Damon, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
No worries, Sean.
That was Damon Kitney, business commentator and the author of The Price of Fortune, the biography of James Packer. This is a Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.